A realistic portrait of a young professional woman in her late 20s to early 30s, standing in a corporate office setting. She has a serious, determined expression, holding a stack of notes close to her chest as if she just finished a difficult presentation. Her posture shows both vulnerability and inner strength, with subtle tension in her eyes. She wears a neat blouse and blazer, minimal professional makeup, natural hair styled simply. Soft cinematic lighting highlights her face, emphasizing resilience and emotion, as if she is about to prove everyone wrong. Ultra-realistic, dramatic, emotional portrait. Just as my boss closed his folder with that smug grin, the glass doors swung open. The sound echoed across the conference room like a sharp crack, and the entire atmosphere shifted in an instant. The chatter stopped, chairs straightened, screens snapped shut. The casual arrogance that had filled the room only moments ago vanished, replaced by a thick, nervous silence. The CEO of the company had just walked in. No one had expected him to attend a Monday briefing. He usually reserved his presence for quarterly reviews, investor calls, or major announcements. The fact that he was here now sent a jolt of energy and dread through every manager in the room. Even the assistants, who normally typed away without lifting their heads, froze mid-keystroke. My boss, the same man who had just laughed at me, leapt to his feet with exaggerated enthusiasm. His voice suddenly high-pitched and eager. "Sir, we were just wrapping up," he said, almost tripping over his words. But the CEO raised a hand, commanding silence without speaking a single sentence. His presence alone was enough to make the entire room feel smaller, colder, heavier. He was a tall man, not imposing by sheer size but by the weight of authority he carried. Every step he took toward the table echoed like a judgment. Then his eyes landed on me. My stomach dropped. Why me? Why now? The last thing I wanted was more attention. I still felt the sting of my boss's words. "You're replaceable." They echoed in my head, poisoning every ounce of confidence I had left. The CEO's gaze shifted to the projector screen, which was still glowing with the final slide of my presentation. He narrowed his eyes, then pointed directly at it. "Who presented this?" he asked, his voice firm, leaving no room for hesitation. The question hung in the air like a challenge. For a second no one spoke. My colleagues looked down at their notes, pretending to be busy. My boss cleared his throat, ready to claim credit. I could see it in the way he leaned forward, lips parting to speak. But I found my voice before he could. "I did, sir," I said, forcing the words out, steady but quiet. The CEO's eyes returned to me, studying me with a focus that felt both terrifying and electrifying. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. "Stay standing," he said. The order caught me off guard. My knees locked, my palms sweating against the papers I still held. My boss shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly irritated that the spotlight had turned away from him. The CEO moved closer to the screen. "This analysis, where did you get these numbers?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "From our financial reports, sir." I cross-checked them against external market data, adjusted for upcoming regulatory changes, and modeled 3 risk scenarios. He raised an eyebrow, almost impressed, though he kept his expression unreadable. "And the strategy you proposed, saving the company millions. Is this your own recommendation?" My voice steadied. "Yes, sir. Every part of it." For a moment silence returned. But this time it was different. It wasn't heavy with humiliation. It was charged waiting. Everyone in the room was watching, eyes darting between me and the CEO, trying to anticipate what would happen next. Then, to everyone's shock, the CEO let out a low laugh. Not mocking, not cruel, genuine. "Finally," he said, almost to himself. "Someone in this department who can think beyond the surface." My boss's face drained of color. He forced a smile, trying to laugh along, but the CEO didn't even glance at him. Instead, he addressed the room. "Do you all realize what you were just handed?" He gestured toward my slides. "A roadmap that could secure this company's future. And yet..." His eyes swept across the managers, sharp and cutting. I walked in, and no one was even discussing it. The shame in the room was palpable. A few managers shifted in their seats, their silence suddenly exposed. My boss adjusted his tie, muttering something under his breath that no one dared acknowledge. The CEO turned back to me. "What's your name?" I gave it, my voice clearer now. He nodded. "From this moment forward, you're not just another analyst. I want you in the next executive strategy session. Directly under me." My heart stopped. Did I hear him right? My boss blinked in disbelief, as if the ground beneath him had just been pulled away. The CEO wasn't finished. "And as for the rest of you," he said, looking around the table, "take a hard look at why it took me walking in here to recognize the value of this work." I stood frozen, not sure whether to smile, nod, or collapse from the adrenaline rushing through me. All I knew was that the same silence that had once made me feel invisible was now making everyone else squirm. And for the first time in that cold conference room, I didn't feel replaceable at all. The CEO's words still rang in my ears. "You're not just another analyst." It felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life. Only moments earlier, I had been humiliated in front of everyone, and now I was being elevated in the same room. My pulse raced, but I forced myself to stay composed. If I showed too much excitement, my boss would use it against me later. I glanced toward him, half expecting some acknowledgement, but what I saw instead was pure fury disguised as a polite smile. His jaw was tight, his knuckles pressed against the table as if he were holding himself back. I could almost hear the thoughts raging in his head. This was supposed to be my moment, my control, my authority. The CEO, unaware, or perhaps fully aware of the tension, continued. "We'll need a clean, expanded version of this report by Thursday. You'll present it directly to the board next week." The board. My heart skipped. That was the inner circle of the company, the place decisions that shaped entire departments were made. For years, I had watched from the outside, believing that seat at the table was unreachable. Now I was being handed the chance. My boss forced a laugh. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a junior analyst. Surely it would be more appropriate if I—" The CEO cut him off with a sharp look. "Are you questioning my judgment?" The room froze again. My boss stammered, shaking his head. "Of course not, sir. I only meant—" "Then don't," the CEO interrupted, his tone final. He didn't raise his voice, but the authority in it left no space for argument. My boss sank back into his chair, lips pressed into a thin line, humiliated in the very way he had humiliated me minutes before. I should have felt vindicated. Part of me did. But another part of me worried. I knew men like him didn't forget slights. His pride had been wounded, and I was now the visible reason. The meeting continued, though I barely registered the details. Managers gave updates, analysts rattled off numbers, but the weight of what had just happened eclipsed everything else. I stayed quiet, my mind racing. When the CEO finally left, the room exhaled in unison. The tension broke, replaced by a low hum of whispered comments. My colleagues stole glances at me, some curious, some envious, some maybe even supportive, but none of them spoke directly to me. Not yet. My boss, however, waited until the door closed before turning his glare on me. "Congratulations," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like you've managed to impress him. Enjoy it while it lasts." I opened my mouth, but no words came. What could I say? That I hadn't asked for this. That I wasn't trying to outshine him. The truth didn't matter. In his eyes, I had already committed the crime, making him look small. The meeting wrapped up quickly after that. People shuffled out, avoiding direct eye contact with me. I gathered my notes slowly, buying time, not eager to face the whispers waiting outside. As I walked back to my desk, I caught snippets of conversation, hushed voices just loud enough to sting. "She's lucky," the CEO walked in. "Let's see how long she lasts. He'll never forgive her for this." They weren't wrong. I felt the weight of invisible targets being pinned to my back. My sudden rise wasn't a triumph everyone would celebrate. It was a disruption, and disruptions always came at a cost. That night, long after the office had emptied, I stayed behind. The glow of my screen lit the darkened floor as I pored over the numbers again, making sure every calculation, every assumption was flawless. If I was going to stand in front of the board, there could be no mistakes. No cracks for anyone to exploit. But even as I worked, I couldn't shake the memory of my boss's glare. He wouldn't sit quietly and let this happen. He would scheme, maneuver, and strike when I least expected it. The question wasn't if, it was when. I closed my laptop at midnight, exhausted but resolute. For the first time in years, I felt both fear and excitement burning in equal measure. Fear of the storm I knew was coming. Excitement for the chance to prove, once and for all, that I was not replaceable. What I didn't realize was that my boss had already started planning his revenge. The days leading up to the board meeting felt like walking through a storm I couldn't see, but could feel pressing against me from all sides. My boss barely spoke to me, except for clipped instructions or cold glares that made his feelings painfully clear. Still, I noticed the shifts. Conversations around me would stop the moment I approached. Files I needed went mysteriously missing, only to reappear hours later. A wrong version of a spreadsheet found its way to my inbox, subtle traps meant to undermine me. I worked through it all, double-checking every number, every slide. Sleep became an afterthought, meals skipped, weekends erased. By the time the morning of the board meeting arrived, I was exhausted but ready. If this was the fight he wanted, I wasn't going down quietly. The boardroom was a world apart from the conference room where it had all begun. The polished wood table stretched endlessly, surrounded by faces of power and influence. The CEO sat at the head, his presence commanding. My boss hovered beside him, oozing false confidence. He had clearly positioned himself to reclaim control, to overshadow me before I even began. When the CEO introduced me, my boss leaned in with a smirk. "If I may, I'd like to preface her presentation with some context," he said smoothly. The CEO frowned but nodded. My boss launched into a speech dripping with condescension. He described my analysis as promising but incomplete, framing it as something he had guided and supervised. He pointed out supposed flaws, numbers he claimed didn't align, assumptions he labeled risky. He painted me as naive, inexperienced, lucky at best. Each word landed like a blow. I stood there, silent, gripping the clicker in my hand, my knuckles white. The board members shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at me with doubt, others with pity. For a moment, I feared his plan was working. Then the CEO raised a hand. "Enough. Let's hear from her directly." I exhaled, steadied myself, and began. The first slide appeared, and I spoke with every ounce of strength I had left. My voice shook at first, but as I moved from chart to chart, detail to detail, something changed. I wasn't just reciting numbers anymore. I was telling a story. A story of risk avoided, of opportunities uncovered, of a future the company could claim if they were bold enough. I saw it in their faces. The nods, the pens scribbling, the quiet murmurs of agreement. They were listening. Really listening. Halfway through, my boss tried to interrupt. "With respect, that figure is unrealistic." But before he could finish, one of the directors cut him off. "Actually, she's right. I've seen the same projections externally." The shift was immediate. My boss's smirk faltered, his interruptions growing weaker with each passing slide. By the time I reached the conclusion, the room felt entirely different. Silence followed my final words. Not the heavy silence of humiliation, but the charged silence of consideration. Then the CEO leaned forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard the future of this company. And it didn't come from a manager or a director. It came from someone most of you probably didn't even know last week." He turned to me. "Outstanding work." The applause was sudden, powerful. Some polite, some genuine, but all directed at me. My boss sat frozen, his face pale, His authority shattered in front of the very people he had hoped to impress. For the first time I allowed myself to smile, not out of arrogance but relief, pride, and a quiet sense of justice. When the meeting ended, the CEO pulled me aside. "You have a sharp mind and the resilience to back it. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Starting today, you'll be reporting directly to me." I nodded, words failing me. As I left the boardroom, I caught my boss's eyes. The same man who once laughed and told me I was replaceable now looked at me with something closer to fear. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came. For once, it was his silence that filled the room. And in that silence I realized the truth. I hadn't just survived his humiliation. I had turned it into my power. I was no longer replaceable.